Okay guys, so today we're going to look at our first poem by Elizabeth Bishop, and this poem is called The Fish. So before we start into reading the poem, I want you to think, so in this poem Bishop considers the life of a fish which she has caught. The fish has a number of old hooks in its mouth. I want you to think, what do you think Bishop thinks about the fish when she sees this? When she catches this fish, okay, the picture in front of you there is the type of fish that she caught. Imagine it's got a number of hooks sticking out of its mouth. Considering what we looked at in terms of Bishop's life in the introductory lesson, what do you think she might think about this fish? What kind of themes from her work do you think might come up in this? Okay, so we're going to jump straight into the poem itself. I caught a tremendous fish and held him beside the boat, half out of water with my hook fast in a corner of his mouth. He didn't fight. He hadn't fought at all. He hung a grunting weight, battered and venerable and homely. Here and there his brown skin hung in strips like ancient wallpaper, and his pattern of darker brown was like wallpaper, shapes like full-blown roses, stained and lost through age. He was speckled with barnacles, fine rosettes of lime, and infested with tiny white sea lice, and underneath 2 or 3 rags of green weed hung down, while his gills were breathing in the terrible oxygen. Frightening gills, fresh and crisp with blood, that can cut so badly. I thought of the coarse, white flesh packed in like feathers, the big bones and the little bones, the dramatic reds and blacks of his shiny entrails, and the pink swim bladder like a big peony. I looked into his eyes, which were far larger than mine, shallower and yellow, the irises backed and packed with tarnished tin foil, seen through the lenses of old scratched isinglass. They shifted a little, but not to return my stare. It was more like the tipping of an object toward the light. I admired his sullen face, the mechanism of his jaw, and then I saw that from his lower lip, if you could call it a lip, grim, wet and weapon-like, hung 5 old pieces of fish line, or 4 and a wire leader, with the swivel still attached, with all the 5 big hooks grown firmly in his mouth. A green line frayed at the end where he broke it, 2 heavier lines, and a fine black thread still trimmed from the strain and snap when it broke and he got away. Like medals with their ribbons frayed and wavering, like medals with their ribbons frayed and wavering, a 5-haired beard of wisdom trailing from his aching jaw. I stared, and victory filled up the little rented boat, from the pool of bilge where oil had spread a rainbow around a rusted engine, to the baler of rusted orange. The sun-cracked thwarts, the oarlocks on their strings, the gunnels, until everything was rainbow, 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 and I let the fish go. Okay, so we can see in the poem, it's quite a long poem, but there's lots and lots of imagery coming across in it, and really imagery is very, very important to Bishop. Okay, so just from our initial impressions, what I want to think about is, what details does Bishop notice about the fish she has caught? What specific aspects of the fish does she describe in most detail? And why do you think she lets the fish go at the end of the poem? Okay, she spent this time catching the fish and examining it. Why did she decide to let it go at the end? Okay, so I'm going to flick back over onto the poem. I want you to think about those 2 questions for 2 or 3 minutes. Okay, have a good idea of those questions before we move on. Okay, so you can pause the video here. Okay, so you should have had a thought about these questions. So the first question was, what does she notice about the fish? And the second one, why do you think she lets it go? And what we'll notice about the fish is she sees that, first of all, that it didn't fight, he hadn't fought at all. Okay, so it seems like the fish has given up. We see a lot of description about the colours of the fish. She talks about his skin. She talks about the white sea lice. Okay, so the fish seems quite old and quite an unpleasant thing to look at. It seems quite ugly. Okay, she then starts to think about the insides of the fish. So as a fisher, as someone who fishes regularly, she would be aware of the process of gutting a fish and the innards of the fish. Okay, so she starts to think about the inside of the fish and what it's made up of. Okay, and she also very much considers the eyes and the jaw of the fish. Okay, the eyes and the face of the fish. Okay, so all of this is very close and descriptive imagery from Bishop. At the end, she does let the fish go, and this is really what we're going to be examining in detail in this poem. We can think about what she notices at the end towards the fish. So after she's looked in the eyes and then she sees the 5 lines hanging from its mouth, or the 4 in a wire leader. You want to think then about, what do these represent to her? Why would these possibly make her want to let the fish go? Okay, so we'll start off with going to break it up into a few different sections. So we're going to start the first section. I caught a tremendous fish and held him beside the boat, half out of water with my hook fast in the corner of his mouth. He didn't fight, he hadn't fought at all. He hung a grunting weight, battered and venerable and homely. Here and there his brown skin hung in strips like ancient wallpaper, and his pattern of darker brown was like wallpaper, shapes like full-blown roses, stained and lost through age. He was speckled with barnacles, fine rosettes of lime, and infested with tiny white sea lice, and underneath 2 or 3 rags of green weed hung down. So a few questions to consider here. What colours are used to describe the fish, first of all? What do we know about the actions of the fish? What does the fish do? How does it act? And what impression do you think Bishop wants us to form of the fish? So again, really go back and read through it again, see if you can find an answer to those 3 questions. Okay, so I suggest pausing the video here for 2 minutes again. So the colours we're going to notice, first colours, we're going to notice the brown skin. Okay, this is not a wonderfully colourful fish. This is a typical, ugly fish that you might see anywhere. So his skin is like wallpaper. It's got the rosettes. So it's greeny and browny. It's rosettes of lime, which are mentioned later on. It's a dark fish, and she says brown twice here. See here and there is brown skin, and then with its patterns of darker brown was like wallpaper. So very much not the best looking fish you could imagine. What do we know about the actions of the fish? The main, and we've already pointed this out, he didn't fight, he hadn't fought at all. The fish seems to have given up. And then what impression do you think Bishop wants us to form of the fish? And perhaps she might want us to think that it's just quite an ordinary fish, but it's a tired fish, it's exhausted, and that's why it's not fighting. But if we look at the way it's described, there's nothing particularly special about the fish. Okay, it's just an ordinary, fairly unattractive creature. So some notes alongside this section of the poem. From the opening lines, we know that this is personal through the use of the first person pronouns. We've talked about this in the introduction to Bishop. Her poetry is very, very personal. It talks about her personal experiences and gives us insights into her life. Bishop describes a memory of what seems to be a fairly unimportant moment, we might think, yet we see how she takes this an important lesson from this moment. She learns a lot and she considers this moment in quite a lot of detail. We see that the fish seems passive to its own demise. The fish doesn't fight off its death, the fact that it's been caught. He hadn't fought at all, he hadn't struggled against her. So she's making it seem tired, as if it's just given up on life. And this is perhaps a feeling we've all had at different times. This probably is one of the aspects that makes this such a universally appreciated poem, is this idea of tiredness and exhaustion that probably everyone has experienced at some point in life, and that when another thing hits us, another trouble or another issue, that really we're just too tired to keep fighting, and that's what she can relate to with this fish. In terms of techniques, we can talk about the trio of adjectives. Okay, so he's battered, venerable and homely. Shows close attention to detail, and that the fish has suffered. He's battered. Okay, but nevertheless he should be respected. That's the venerable. Okay, so just because he's ordinary, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't respect him. If we think about what he's been through, we should be showing him respect, but he's typically just an ordinary looking fish. We can notice our use of simile. Bishop's poetry is full of poetic techniques. Okay, so trio of adjectives. Now we can talk about simile. Simile here is strange as she compares fish's appearance to floral wallpaper. Okay, so it's not the most normal kind of expression you might expect from poetry, but she's comparing one quite ordinary thing to another quite ordinary thing. And she just doesn't go into, big, huge, making everything seem beautiful. There's a beauty in the ordinariness of it. We see a trait of Bishop's worldview here. She found beauty where most people would simply see the fish as being ugly. And then the continued description of the fish's appearance prompts us to think about the past of the fish, what it has been through in life. Okay, so she gives us more detail. We start thinking about the fish as more than just a basic creature, thinking about its past, thinking about what it's been through. Okay, so very much trying to hint to us how we should look at life itself. Moving on, so the next section of the poem we're going to look at. While his gills were breathing in the terrible oxygen, the frightening gills, fresh and crisp of blood that could cut so badly, I thought of the coarse white flesh packed in like feathers, the big bones and the little bones, the dramatic reds and blacks of his shiny entrails and the pink swim bladder like a big peony. I looked into his eyes, which were far larger than mine, but shallower and yellowed, the irises backed and packed with tarnished tinfoil, seen through the lenses of an old scratched isinglass. They shifted a little, but not to return my stare. It was more like a tipping of an object towards the light. Okay, so only 2 questions along this section. Find out, first of all, what is a peony, what imagery, when you find out what it is, or if you possibly already know, what imagery does Bishop repeatedly bringing up in the poem. Once you figure out what that image is, we can see, look back through the poem, see if you can see that in common with any of the other images that already come up. And what does she know about the eyes of the fish? And this is very, very important that you look at detail about what she says about the eyes here. Okay, so again, pause the video for 2 or 3 minutes and think about those questions. Okay, so one thing you might notice about the imagery here, so peony is a flower, so we should have found out it is a flower, and we can notice if we look back, she talked about the floral wallpaper in the last section when we looked at. So flowers are coming up over and over again, and this brings in the idea of beauty, so simple beauty. If she's comparing aspects of the fish to flowers, there's definitely an aspect of beauty coming in there and what she's seeing as beauty in the fish. We also asked what does she know about the eyes of the fish. There's a few things we can look at here. So first of all, the eyes, she says, are far larger than mine. Now if we went back to the start, you can see the fish that I put the picture of up. This is a large fish, and it's quite likely the fish's eyes are bigger than hers. It may not necessarily be exaggeration here, but they're shallower and yellowed. And she doesn't feel necessarily that the fish and her are having a moment, because the fish doesn't look at her. The fish's eyes are just reacting to the light. The fish is just reacting to the stimulus around it. Okay, so she isn't quite yet personifying the fish. She's not quite yet at the stage where she's feeling at one with the fish, but she is very much considering what the fish is. Okay, considering it as a different being. So it's still a living being. She can still appreciate it without necessarily feeling a personal connection to it. So that's what she's doing here in terms of she's considering what it's made of, she's considering the insides of it, she's considering everything that makes up the fish, and she's looking at the eyes and she sees the eyes as something that's living. And perhaps even if it's so different to her, perhaps it's still worthy of life. Okay? Does she have, and she can connect with it without necessarily personifying or seeing herself in it. So these lines go into close examination of the fish. She knows the difference between the fish and herself. And like we pointed out through the terrible oxygen, we're very much pointing out a difference in that terrible oxygen is terrible for fish, but it's so necessary to us as humans. She goes on to imagine the insides of the fish, so as a keen fisher, as I've already said, she'd be very aware of the process of gutting a fish. She's perhaps considering the process of killing the fish, which has already been through so much in life, so she's thinking about what she's planning on doing with fish. You go fishing to kill the fish. That would have been the plan that she had when she went out fishing, but now she's thinking about the insides and thinking about the fishing at another level. There was a very large focus on the eyes of the fish here. You have to be able to comment on the eyes of the fish. So Bishop's careful not to personify the fish just yet. Okay? She sees how it's different to humans and reacts differently to the world. The fish's eyes are larger but shallow, it follows the light rather than return her stare. She may be considering her lack of understanding of the fish. There is, however, a slight sense of empathy with the fish at this point. Okay, it's not huge yet, okay, but it's definitely coming across. She's definitely considering the fish and its life. Okay, so be careful in terms of this poem. Don't talk about her being overly empathetic to the fish the whole time. She does grow empathy towards the fish, as you'll see when we move on, but it's not necessarily throughout the entirety of the poem. Here, she's very much just considering it. So moving on to the next section. I admired his sullen jaw, the mechanism of I admired his sullen face, the mechanism of his jaw, and then I saw that from his lower lip, if you could call it a lip, grim, wet and weapon-like, hung 5 old pieces of fish line, or 4 and a wire leader, with the swivel still attached, with all their 5 big hooks going firmly in his mouth. The green line frayed at the end where he broke it, 2 heavier lines and a fine black thread still crimped from stains or strain and snap. When it broke and he got away. Like medals with their ribbons, frayed and wavering, a 5-haired beard of wisdom trailing from his aching jaw. So 2 questions to consider here. What does Bishop notice about the fish in these lines, and what does she consider about the life of the fish? So again, I'm going to suggest pause here for 2 or 3 minutes and just consider those questions yourselves. So in these lines, what she notices is she notices the 5 hooks coming from the fish's jaw, and she thinks through this that perhaps the fish has been through a more difficult life. She compares down those last 4 lines of this section that she compares these hooks to like a soldier's medals. It shows the battles that the fish has been through. And now she may be appreciating why it hadn't fought against her, because it fought through so much in its life already. She's seeing tiredness, she's seeing exhaustion and the effects of a brutal and difficult life on the fish, how it's reacted to all of that, or everything that it's been through. Okay. So a few notes on this section of the poem. She continues to examine the appearance of the fish in a somewhat clinical manner, the mechanism of its jaw. So again, she is considering it, she is not necessarily connecting emotionally or emotionally personifying it yet. Okay. She again uses a trio of adjectives, okay, so we can keep talking about that as a technique from Bishop. Okay, we used a trio of adjectives earlier on when it was battered, venerable and homely. Now we use a trio of adjectives describing the hooks, that they are wet, grim and weapon-like. And then you also have the alliteration in there, wet and weapon-like. She's using to describe the hooks that she's noticed in the fish's mouth. She begins to feel a much greater sense of connection with the fish. Okay, these hooks are symbols of a difficult life and the struggles of the fish's life. She has been through a lot in her own life, and she can maybe connect with the struggles the fish is going through. It is worth remembering here some of the things we've learned about Bishop's life. So the fact of her being, the struggle she went through with her family, also her battles with depression and alcoholism, and perhaps all of these are what the hooks represent to her. Similarly, in the last lines here, emphasise the respect which she has developed with the fish, and that is that military imagery, okay, that like medals with their ribbons frayed, that is comparing the fish to a soldier and showing the respect for a soldier fighting battles as the fish as a soldier having fought through life. Okay, so we're going to look at the final section now. I stared and stared, and victory filled up the little rented boat. From the pool of bilge where oil had spread, a rainbow around a rusted engine, to the bale of rusted orange, the sun-cracked thwarts, the oar locks on their strings, and the gunnels, and everything was rainbow, 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 and I let the fish go. So what fills the boat in these lines, and what do you think the image of the rainbow could represent? Okay, so pause for 2 minutes and consider those questions. Okay, so what fills up the boat? You can see that there's oil spreading out from the boat, and it's, she says victory is filling up. And it's more that she is kind of understanding, it's her understanding, she has an epiphany here. Okay, and that can be what the rainbow represents as well. The rainbow represents her understanding of the world and her new view of the world and the epiphany that she is having here. Okay, and what that epiphany may be is that up till now she has very much considered the fish as something other, right? The clinicalness and the mechanism of its jaw, right? The shallow yellowed eyes. She's much not seeing it as something she overly connects with, and there's a clear there's a slight line here throughout the poem that she doesn't quite personify the fish up until the end. Here is where she really starts to see the fish in a closer way, and the epiphany she comes to at the end. She realised the fish is something more than maybe something just for her to catch, and that's why she lets it go. So a few lines, mainly going to look at these final lines here. So look at the red box first actually. So the repetition of rainbow represents the strength of her new views as taking a whole view of the world. Okay. So basically what you say, it's poorly expressed there, sorry. Because by representing rainbow, 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 she's saying that this epiphany is having a much wider effect on her. It's not just this moment, it's filling up her life, and she looks at life maybe in a new way after this. Go back up to the green box then. In the final line of the poem, Bishop has an epiphany about the fish. The colour of the rainbow fills her, filling up her boat, represents her changed view. At the end of the poem, her view of the fish has completely changed and she lets it go. And the final line sums up the point of the poem. The bishop has come to a new understanding of the world, and the fact that the fish lives is perhaps giving hope as well, that no matter how many hardships we go through, we can keep swimming, we can keep going through the world, we can keep surviving. Okay? So lots and lots going on in this poem. You really need to consider when she's that moment of epiphany, and be careful about that. Okay? Careful about when she actually really feels the close connection to the fish. Okay? Don't think that she feels that connection the whole way through. A lot of the language before this epiphany at the end is seeing the fish as the other, and that's why the epiphany is so important at the end. Okay? You have to talk about this final line about her, the rainbow and letting the fish go if you're going to talk about this poem. Okay, so overall points. The themes of the poem we're going to consider are survival. The fish is a survivor, Bishop herself is a survivor, and it's about the idea of surviving life. There is struggle. Okay, the fish has escaped 5 hooks before, and now is up against her. And in fact, it's struggled so far in life, but now it is just feeling completely exhausted and unable to go on. There's also the loneliness and the shallowness of the fish's eyes, and her loneliness, and she's in the boat by herself and feels a connection really to the fish. Perhaps represents she doesn't feel that connection too much else in the world. The poet sees these ideas in the fish, and we can see human experience reflected in the animal. Right? Her own struggles with illness, alcoholism and anxiety can be discussed in the context of the poem, so we can definitely use this poem as a discussion of her own struggles. And the concept of respect. Okay? Remember the fish throughout it, even before she decides to let it go, she calls it venerable, she calls it something that is worthy of respect. She respects nature, she respects the fish. The originality of Bishop's worldview is highlighted with use of imagery here. Okay, this strange imagery, this comparing the fish's skin to wallpaper. Okay, this type of imagery comes up a lot. Comparing the swim bladder to the peony. This is something we have to keep an eye out for in Bishop's. Very much a feature of her use of language, in that she considers maybe the more ordinary aspects of life and looks at the beauty of them. Okay. There's similes, metaphors, personification all throughout this poem. Okay, or personification mainly towards the end, lots of simile, lots of metaphor. There's a lot of alliteration and assonance in here as well, so I pointed out alliteration at one point. These are used to control the speed of the poem, and she also uses repetition and trios of adjectives here. So you can see with Bishop's poetry, there are so many techniques going on. She uses a huge amount of poetic technique in her work that you should be able to find these in basically any quote you choose from her and be able to bring them into a discussion of her use of language. The poem also takes on, just be aware of, it takes on the idea, the form of a fable. Okay, so most of you will be aware of some of Aesop's fables from your childhood, and fables are where humans can learn an important lesson from an animal. Okay, fables are short stories, nearly always based around animals, telling us lessons to live by. And she learns this lesson from the fish to keep going, and she learns to respect the struggle that the fish has been through. Okay, so tasks for today. I want you to choose one of the following two tasks to complete. So the first choice is you can draw a picture of the fish described in the poem. Around the fish, make notes of the quotations you used to inspire the features of your drawing, and make a comment on the metaphorical meaning of these features. So I want a detailed drawing if you're going to do this. Okay, looking at all the different descriptions. You want to be drawing the eyes, you want to be drawing the hooks, you want to be drawing the skin. Okay, you want to give me as much detail as you can. Okay, now some of you are much more creative in your ideas than I am, but I want at least 4 or 5 features from the poem being displayed in your picture. Or if you don't want to be drawing, if that's not your kind of way of working, you could write a narrative of a time when you felt a connection to an animal to help you reflect on your own life. Okay, and this could be real life or fictional, but a similar thing where you've had an experience with an animal. Okay, writing in first person, some kind of experience with an animal that made you reflect on your own life. Okay, so you spent about 20 sorry, 20-30 minutes at least on one of those tasks, okay, and get me a good detail to really help just to get your understanding of the poem moving forward.